This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible with a copy of the game provided by Rising Star Games. In episode 282 of Bullet Heaven, we took a look at Ginga Force for the PlayStation 4. Though it bears only a passing similarity to its spiritual predecessor Eschatos, we still enjoyed it despite its numerous gameplay departures. Now, Qute is back with a new shooter that ties directly into Ginga Force, but with yet another set of twists and shakeups. Natsuki Chronicles is a widescreen horizontal shooting game developed by Qute. It was first released to the Xbox One on December 25, 2019, published by Qute themselves, but it would also make its way to PlayStation 4 and Windows PC via Steam on February 17, 2021, published in the West by Rising Star Games. It is also compatible with Xbox Series S and X, as well as PlayStation 5. So, what's new in Natsuki Chronicles? Does it hold up? Does lightning strike thrice? Or, like, quadrice if you count Judgment Silver. You get it. Let's take a closer look. Natsuki Chronicles might be Qute's first horizontal scroller, but the hallmarks of their previous titles are still maintained, giving it a pretty familiar feel. Players can control Natsuki's ship with either the left analog stick or the D-pad. In the case of the analog stick, true analog control is available, allowing for players to vary their speed on the fly with stick tilt. This even applies when using variable speed options on Natsuki's ship, which is toggled with the R1 button. To start, players have a shield gauge made up of 3 segments in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. If the player is hit, some or all of a segment will be lost. However, the shield gauge will also recharge, filling back up to a maximum of 3 segments. More shield power can be added to this gauge in different ways, which we'll take a look at shortly. Natsuki Chronicles also has another neat feature. Shots in the game will telegraph their path of trajectory. This is meant to help players navigate the often hectic fire that their opposition will frequently unload, especially with regards to arcing shots and hazards that are affected by gravity. More interesting still is that these traces will not appear until the player is in danger of being hit, with some exceptions. The weaker the trace, the less threatening the shot. However, it will grow stronger if the player flies towards the projected hazard zone. Players have access to 3 weapon systems. Natsuki's primary weapon is fired with the cross button, and is best used for dispatching larger enemies and bosses directly in front of Natsuki's ship. Machine guns, wave cannons, lasers, and even some homing weapons can be applied as a primary weapon, and each will have varying power and fire speed. A flexible secondary weapon is also available, which allows Natsuki to attack enemies beyond the scope of the primary weapon. Activated with the square button, some can even be used to fire behind her, which is handy as enemies and bosses will often appear behind her ship. Once again, the secondary weapon will vary in power and fire rate depending on the one chosen. Here's where things get interesting though. Unlike Ginga Force, where players must keep track of, manage, and refill weapon power between their main and sub-weapons, Natsuki Chronicles allows for these weapons to be used indefinitely, with a bit of a catch. When used independently of each other, the primary and secondary weapon will fire at full power. But while both can absolutely be fired at once, their power levels will drop as a result. This can mean the difference between a faster or a slower kill, depending on the situation. Finally, a special weapon, which can be used either for defense or offense depending on the module equipped, is activated with the R trigger. These special weapons are tied to a gauge which will deplete as they are used, so players should definitely take care when deploying them in crowded situations. However, like the life gauge, the special weapons gauge will also refill, albeit much quicker. Natsuki Chronicles gives the player 2 different modes of play, each with very different progression and mechanics depending which is chosen. First up is the story mode, an exposition-heavy campaign played over the course of 10 main stages with a handful of training phases. This is where players will control the exploits of the titular Natsuki as she follows the directives of the Rapid Deployment Force, or RDF. Progression in this mode is very similar to Ginga Force, with subsequent stages and training memories unlocked as more and more stages are completed. These stages can be cleared and the game seen to its conclusion on any difficulty, but higher difficulty modes can be opened up as any stage in question is cleared on higher and higher settings. Like Ginga Force, a large number of weapons can be developed and unlocked through various means to be purchased by the player and equipped to Natsuki's ship. These weapons can be mixed and matched to form a combination that matches the player's style before any given stage, adding a layer of strategy to the game. However, this system isn't nearly as intricate as the one found in Ginga Force, though admittedly we didn't really mess around with too much outside of weapons and defenses in that game either. Players can also dial in the speed in which their ship will move between its two engine settings, and whether or not it is toggled or held. These are great options that allow players who thrive with extreme speed or super slow movement to find a balance they really like, but the default settings still work well. For those that need a helping hand, there are even more features that unlock with repeat play, particularly if a stage needs to be retried. A number of experience gauges can be filled to increase the player's shield count through EX shields. The higher the stage study level, the more will be available. Players can choose how many EX shields they want though, which allows purists to opt completely out of this feature. An overall player level will also unlock new weapons and features as it climbs. Player experience is awarded with every stage completed or failed, though more is awarded with higher performance. Story mode is a great way to see all of what Natsuki Chronicles has to offer, at a more casual pace that offers players good flexibility in the difficulty of every stage, which can double as a training mode for the other included mode, Arcade. In Arcade mode, players take the game on over the course of 9 stages, sans story. This mode offers players the opportunity to play the game in a manner that allows for a traditional 1-credit clear. There are a couple of changes to Arcade though. Firstly, there is no ship customization. Players will collect weapons to enhance and upgrade the firepower for their primary, secondary, and special weapons from dedicated carrier ships throughout the game. These pickups will also be added to the player's shield totals. The same 3-segment life bar is present to keep players from dying outright, and it can be recharged just like in story mode. But any weapons collected will be added as additional shield sections, which act as a buffer before the player loses any real ship integrity. However, these segments also represent the weapons and increased power the player has collected, so as they are chipped away, their power will be reduced until they are finally left with only their basic shots and nothing more. When the player loses all of their life, their run comes to an end with the option to continue unlimited credits. More credits can also be earned through repeat play via higher operator levels. Natsuki Chronicles is a good game. Very good in fact, but the story mode doesn't feel quite as cohesive as Ginga Force before it, nor did we feel its flow was as smooth. While the controls are on par with Ginga Force in terms of function, the core weapon mechanics are a bit more streamlined and a little better for it. But the trajectory prediction feature, while neat, is a little problematic. Especially in the case of bosses, these traces often result in the opposite of its intended effect, overwhelming our ability to judge what's coming at us and from where, resulting in a swift death. However, the trace system can be lessened or turned off entirely if required. Of course, with this in mind, we also have to concede that the arcade mode is pretty amazing, to the point that we kind of wish it was the main mode, complete with its story. The story mode, on the other hand, might have made a better score attack mode, a la Bangai-O, with its story stripped and enhanced customization used to find the best way to achieve a per-stage score. It's already just about set up that way as it is, after all. Maybe we're just being nitpicky and, well, nah, we're actually definitely being picky, but the fact remains, Natsuki Chronicles is destined to be one of the best shooters this year, despite its issues. Of course, outside of its core gameplay lies a decent scoring system, which only adds to the replay and fun factor. Natsuki Chronicles does some neat stuff with its scoring. Obviously, blowing stuff up will add to the score in a big way, but there's a bit more to it. Players will notice a number of Greek letters telegraphed in markers around the edges of the screen as they make their way through any given stage. These markers indicate enemies that are part of a formation which, when fully destroyed, will award the player with a sizable point bonus. Since multiple formations can appear at a time, the bonuses awarded for each will be color-coded and marked when achieved, in an effort to let players know which was defeated and collected. This can also apply not only to the typical Zako fluff, but also much larger enemies, sometimes resulting in significantly larger amounts of points depending on their strength. Another sizable bonus can be obtained based on the time it takes to destroy the stage end boss. As expected, the faster they can be destroyed, the better this bonus will be. Stage end does not yield any further bonuses in story mode. Instead, a letter rating is applied based on a point system tallied when the player's stage attempt comes to an end, whether they succeed in clearing it or not. The percentage of all enemy types destroyed, how many formations are wiped out, and how many hits are taken, and whether the stage was in fact cleared, will result in a letter grade that tops out at S+++, which is a plus. Unfortunately though, there are no online leaderboards for story mode stages, which we feel is a bit of a missed opportunity. Thankfully, arcade mode picks up the slack, as not only are the same bonuses from story applicable in arcade, but extra points for weapon collection and a sizable rating bonus based on the letter grade criteria from story can add a sizable chunk to the player's overall score. Unlike story, arcade mode does have online leaderboards, allowing players to stack themselves up with others from around the world. In this respect, arcade mode is where a good amount of Natsuki Chronicles' most engaging, and ultimately most fun, replay will likely occur. Between Eschatos and Ginga Force, the difference between the two in terms of presentation is very stark. Between Ginga Force and Natsuki Chronicles, though, it's much more subtle. Originally having been developed specifically for the Xbox One, Natsuki Chronicles was always going to look better than the Xbox 360 developed Ginga Force. And while the recent PlayStation 4 version of Ginga Force still looked very good, its previous generation roots were still noticeable. In the case of Natsuki Chronicles though, models are smoother, lighting more refined, the textures are finer, visual effects such as reflections are more crisp. But there are other aspects that seem a little out of place though. Explosions look not especially great, harkening back to, there's no easy way to say this, they remind us an awful lot of Mighty No. 9. The often sprawling environments also look really good, though some hard polygon edges are going to be noticeable. Soft focus and depth of field effects are a nice touch that add further visual depth, a rather important feature for a side-scroller. But as we ran this game on a base model PS4, we noticed that some of the more sprawling environments chunk down the system with a lower frame rate. Playing on the PlayStation 4 or on PC likely mitigates this, but with no way to test it, we'll leave it to our viewers in the comments to confirm our suspicions. Otherwise, character art, portraits, mechanical design, enemies, stages, and even the title logo are all top-notch. On the sound front, there's going to be a lot of overlap with regards to the game's effects. Many of the sounds in Natsuki Chronicles are borrowed from Ginga Force, which itself carried over a number of effects from Eschatos, which also used a number of its effects from Judgment Silversword. I guess what we're getting at here is that just to hear the weapons, explosions, selection effects, and more, Natsuki Chronicles maintains its MKai and Qute identity, and that's never a bad thing. The music here is more narrowly focused though, with Yosuke Yasui once again heading up the soundtrack, though this time around only one other composer, Kazuhiro Kobayashi, has joined him in Natsuki Chronicles. The soundtrack here definitely seems to be more Eschatos than Ginga Force with this in mind, and as with the sound effects, some music pieces have migrated to Natsuki Chronicles from Ginga Force as well. Being that the plot of Natsuki Chronicles overlaps Ginga Force in places, this is a nice touch. And generally speaking, the plot is pretty coherent, though it felt a little weak even by shooting game standards. There's some internal conflict, a dash of rebellion, and of course a fairly predictable boss encounter given the circumstances, but it didn't feel as significant as Ginga Force did. Still, it offers an interesting insight into other events taking place during the events of Ginga Force that diehards are surely to enjoy regardless. Rounding out the presentation is a great UI with excellent, easy-to-navigate design and a set of trophies on PlayStation and achievements on Steam and Xbox for players to work towards. All in all, everything a player might want in a Qute game. So, how does Natsuki Chronicles stack up? Let's take a look. Natsuki Chronicles gives the player some good options for controlling their ship, and it feels mostly great. Natsuki Chronicles has a good amount of challenge that will satisfy players between novices on the outset and the unlockable difficulties for experts later on. At 10 core stages with extra training levels and special sequences between the episodic story mode and the full-run arcade mode, there's a ton to play in Natsuki Chronicles. Replay for higher difficulties and score chasing add to the overall length. Natsuki Chronicles is a natural evolution with regards to its visual stylings compared to Ginga Force, but there are some aspects we aren't totally sold on, particularly the enemy explosions. It will also chunk down at times with frame drops on base PlayStation 4 hardware. Natsuki Chronicles sounds very much like Ginga Force did, with all kinds of borrowed sound effects and even a couple of music tracks. The new music is, once again, very good, but perhaps not on the level that Ginga Force or Eschatos were. Natsuki Chronicles does some neat things with the side-scrolling formula, refining Ginga Force's upgrade system, adding a traditional arcade mode, and generally working very well. Except for its trajectory plotting system. It caused a lot of problems with visibility and shot anticipation with certain bosses. We don't know if it would be better or worse if it simply wasn't there, but as a core feature that differentiates it from Qute's other games, it's a bit of a dud. We have to be honest, Natsuki Chronicles wasn't quite as good as we hoped. But that's also not saying especially much, because while it isn't as great as Eschatos or Ginga Force before it, Natsuki Chronicles is still an excellent top-tier shooter. And it's one that's sure to be revisited by us again and again, and it will definitely be revisited again. Despite some of the frustrations we had with its core innovations, Natsuki Chronicles still gets a 4.5 out of 5. You can get a copy of Natsuki Chronicles on PlayStation 4, PC, or Xbox Series consoles today. Physical editions are also being produced for PlayStation 4 by First Press Games. Link in the description below. Well, that was a bit of a detour, but we're back on track with Qute for episode 293 of Bullet Heaven. Then it's on to the first Dreamcast shooting game of 2021, with Retrosumus' Xenocider in episode 294. See you all in the next episode.